"Get that junk out of my launch." Victoria Hale said it softly, but the microphone clipped to her blazer carried every word across the plaza, through the cameras, past the velvet ropes, and into the ears of a little girl sitting in the passenger seat of a broken 1967 Mustang. For half a second, nobody moved. Then someone laughed. Then another. Then the whole front row of reporters turned their lenses toward the old car as if it were the real exhibit, not the shining silver electric prototype behind Victoria on the stage. Caleb Walker stood beside the driver's door with grease on his hands, rainwater on his denim jacket, and his daughter's inhaler tucked in his palm. He had not come to make a scene. He had not come to embarrass anyone. He had only turned into the VIP entrance because Lily had started coughing on the interstate, and the security guard at the corner had waved him through before realizing the rusty Mustang did not belong among black SUVs and polished sponsor cars. "Sir, you need to move this vehicle," one guard said. "Now," said Grant Mercer, Hale Motors Public Relations Director, stepping forward with a smile too clean to be kind. "Before it leaks something historic onto our pavement." A few people chuckled again. Lily sank lower in her seat, her small hands gripping the edge of her sketchbook. On the first page, she had drawn that same Mustang in bright midnight blue, with silver wheels, white racing stripes, and her mother's name written across the sun visor in tiny careful letters. Caleb looked through the open window and saw her trying not to cry. He could have snapped back. A man can survive a lot of things, but hearing strangers mock the one thing his child still believed in can strike deeper than any insult aimed at him. But Caleb had learned, through grief and bills and long nights under fluorescent garage lights, that dignity was not silence because you were weak. Sometimes dignity was silence because you refused to hand your soul to people who only knew how to laugh. Victoria looked down from the stage, her blonde hair pinned perfectly, her white suit untouched by the drizzle. She was the face of Hale Motors, the woman magazines called the future of American innovation. Behind her, the company's new vehicle gleamed like a promise made of glass and money. In front of her, Caleb's Mustang coughed once, the old engine ticking as steam lifted from beneath the hood. Even the tow truck would be embarrassed, Grant added, just loud enough for the nearest camera to catch it. This time, the laughter spread faster. Caleb opened Lily's door, crouched beside her, and pressed the inhaler gently into her hand. "Breathe slow, sweetheart," he whispered. "In and out. Like we practiced." "Daddy," she said, her voice barely there, "they think Mom's car is trash." Caleb swallowed. The rain tapped softly on the Mustang's roof, each drop landing like a small unanswered prayer. He looked at the cracked dashboard, the faded leather, the empty space where Hannah used to rest her hand during Sunday drives. Then he looked at his daughter and forced the kind of smile fathers build when they have nothing left but love. "No," he said quietly. "They just don't know what they're looking at." Victoria heard him. Something in his tone made her pause, though she would not have admitted it then. Not in front of the cameras. Not in front of Grant. Not in front of a city waiting for her to be flawless. Caleb stood, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and guided Lily out of the car. He did not bow his head. He did not glare. He simply placed one hand on the Mustang's warm hood like a man touching a memory and said, "Some things look broken because they survived what others couldn't." The laughter faded around the edges, but only for a moment. A tow cart rolled in. Cameras kept recording. Grant waved him away like a stain being removed from a clean table. And Victoria Hale turned back toward her shining future, unaware that the broken Mustang she had mocked carried a promise, a secret, and a truth that, 30 days later, would make the entire city fall silent. By the time Caleb Walker turned onto Briar Lane, the rain had softened into a gray mist, the kind that made every porch light look lonely. Lily sat beside him with her sketchbook closed against her chest, her breathing steady again, though her eyes stayed fixed on the wet windshield. Neither of them spoke for nearly 3 miles. The Mustang rattled over every crack in the road, its heater pushing out more noise than warmth, its old wipers dragging tired half-circles across the glass. To anyone else, it was just an aging car limping home from humiliation. To Caleb, it was the last room in the world where Hannah still seemed close enough to hear. Their house waited at the far end of a narrow street, a small one-story rental with peeling white trim, a sagging mailbox, and a maple tree that dropped red leaves across the driveway every fall like pieces of a fading flag. Caleb parked beside the garage, turned off the engine, and rested both hands on the wheel. The sudden quiet felt heavy. Lily finally whispered, "Why did she say that?" Caleb looked over at her. "Because some people mistake shine for worth. But Mom loved this car." "I know. And you promised." Caleb closed his eyes for one slow breath. There it was. The promise. Not spoken loudly. Not witnessed by a crowd. Just a few words Hannah had written with a trembling hand during the final weeks when sunlight came through the hospital blinds and made everything look gentler than it was. "Promise me Lily will see it run again." He had folded that note and carried it in his wallet ever since, right behind a photograph of Hannah laughing in the passenger seat of that Mustang, her hair loose, one hand on the dashboard, the other pointing toward some road only she could see. Caleb climbed out and opened Lily's door. The garage smelled of motor oil, cedar dust, and old cardboard boxes. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, throwing a warm circle over the concrete floor. On the back wall hung Hannah's faded denim jacket, still on the same hook. Beside it were Caleb's tools, arranged with the careful order of a man who could not afford to lose anything. Lily stepped inside and placed her sketchbook on the workbench. "Can we still fix it?" she asked. Caleb looked at the Mustang through the open garage door. Its paint was dull. Its chrome was tired. Its left fender had a rust bloom the size of a dinner plate. The engine needed parts he could not afford, time he did not have, and luck he had stopped asking heaven for. He worked 6 days a week at Reardon's auto service, took side jobs when his back allowed it, packed Lily's lunches before sunrise, checked homework after dinner, and fell asleep most nights in a chair with repair manuals open on his lap. There was no extra money. No wealthy uncle. No miracle waiting in the mailbox. Just a father, a child, and a broken car holding the shape of a family that used to be whole. "Daddy?" Lily said. Caleb turned. Her small face carried the kind of faith that can make a tired man stand taller than he feels. He walked to the workbench, picked up Hannah's note from a little tin box, and unfolded it carefully. The paper had softened at the creases. The ink had faded, but the words still knew how to breathe. Caleb read them once, silently, then placed the note beside Lily's drawing. "Yes," he said. "We are still going to fix it." Lily studied him. "Even after today?" Caleb nodded. "Especially after today." Outside, a car passed slowly, its tires whispering through rainwater. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went quiet. Caleb rolled up his sleeves and lifted the Mustang's hood. The old hinges groaned, but they held. Lily pulled a wooden stool beside him, the same stool Hannah used to sit on years ago, handing him wrenches and pretending she knew which one he needed before he asked. Caleb reached into the engine bay and touched the worn valve cover. "Your mom used to say machines remember the hands that loved them," he said. Lily looked up. "Do you believe that?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Tonight, I think I need to." He switched on the radio, but only static came through, soft and low like distant rain. The garage light hummed above them. The city beyond their little street kept moving, busy with bright buildings, polished cars, and people who had already forgotten the man they laughed at. But inside that garage, Caleb Walker began again, not because he wanted to prove Victoria Hale wrong, not because he wanted applause, not because anger had made him brave, but because love had left him a promise, and dignity meant keeping it when no one else believed it mattered. The next morning, Caleb was under the Mustang before sunrise, his back pressed against cold concrete, a flashlight balanced against his shoulder, and Lily's lunchbox sitting on the workbench beside a stack of overdue bills. The garage door was open just enough to let in the pale blue of early morning, and the neighborhood was still quiet except for the soft scrape of his wrench and the distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt. He had slept maybe 3 hours. Maybe less. But promises do not care how tired a man is. By 7:15, Lily was dressed for school in a yellow raincoat, her hair brushed neatly, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. She stood by the Mustang, watching him work with the serious face of a child who had learned too early that grown-ups sometimes carried storms behind their eyes. "Do you think anyone at school saw the video?" she asked. Caleb slid out from beneath the car slowly. He did not need to ask what video. By midnight, the clip from the launch had spread across local news pages, neighborhood groups, and every corner of the internet where strangers felt brave enough to be cruel. The image was everywhere now: Victoria Hale on stage, Grant Mercer smiling, the old Mustang steaming under the rain, and Caleb standing beside it with grease on his hands like a man caught in the wrong century. "Some probably did," he said gently. Lily looked down. "What do I say?" Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, then knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "You say the truth. That it is broken?" "No," he said. "That it is not finished." She held that answer for a moment, then nodded as if placing it somewhere safe inside herself. Across town, Victoria Hale sat at the head of a glass conference table 40 floors above the city, watching the same video replay on a wall-sized screen. The room smelled of coffee, leather folders, and expensive caution. Grant Mercer stood near the screen with his tablet in hand, looking less ashamed than entertained. "The clip is everywhere," he said. "Local, regional, trending in 3 states. Not ideal, but not fatal." Victoria's expression did not change. "You told security to waive traffic through that lane." Grant smiled politely. "I told them to keep the launch moving. A child was in the car. And now the public thinks you mocked a working-class father in front of her. That is the problem." Around the table, executives shifted in their chairs. No one wanted to say what everyone knew. The future of Hale Motors had been unveiled under perfect lighting, and yet the city was talking about an old Mustang and a little girl's face. Grant tapped the screen, and the video froze on Caleb's hand resting on the hood. "We can fix this," he said. "We turn it into a human interest campaign. 30 days. 1 old car. 1 struggling father. Hale Motors sponsors the restoration, the city watches, and you become the CEO who gives second chances." Victoria looked at him for a long second. "You want to use him?" "I want to help him publicly." "That is not the same thing." Grant's smile thinned. "With respect, Victoria, public perception does not care about the difference." The room went quiet. Outside the windows, downtown moved in polished lines of traffic and ambition. Victoria looked back at the paused image. Caleb was not glaring at her. That bothered her more than anger would have. There was something steady in him, something she had not seen in boardrooms for a long time. By noon, the invitation arrived at Reardon's Auto Service, where Caleb was replacing brake pads on a delivery van and trying not to notice the 2 customers whispering near the vending machine. The email came through the shop computer first, then a printed copy from Mr. Reardon, who walked over with his eyebrows raised. "Caleb," he said, "you need to see this." Caleb read the headline once. 30 days to restore a dream. Sponsored by Hale Motors. Open to 1 selected local family. Final reveal at City Hall Plaza. Winner receives a technical education scholarship and a community restoration grant. Lily's name seemed to rise off the page even though it was not written there. A scholarship. A door. A chance at something bigger than patched tires and second-hand notebooks. Mr. Reardon scratched his chin. "Looks like they picked you." Caleb folded the paper slowly. "They did not pick me. They picked the story." "Maybe so," Reardon said. "But sometimes a man can still walk through a door open for the wrong reason." That evening, Caleb found Lily at the kitchen table, drawing the Mustang again, only this time she had added small golden wings near the rear fenders. He placed the paper from Hale Motors beside her crayons. She read it carefully, her lips moving over the longer words. 30 days, she asked. 30 days. Can we win? Caleb glanced toward the garage, where the Mustang sat beneath the single bulb, waiting like an old witness. He thought of Victoria's cold voice, Grant's polished laughter, the cameras, the shame, the promise folded in his wallet. Then he thought of Lily walking into school with her head a little higher. I do not know, he said honestly. But we can show up. The next morning, Grant Mercer released the campaign poster. It showed Victoria beside a shining Hale Motors prototype on one side, and Caleb's rusted Mustang on the other, angled under harsh lighting with the caption, "From forgotten junk to second chance." The city shared it by the thousands. Some laughed. Some cheered. Some called it charity. Caleb stared at the poster on his phone, then turned it face down on the workbench. He did not need their respect to begin. He only needed 30 days, 2 tired hands, and enough grace not to become what they expected him to be. By the 4th day, the city had already chosen what it wanted Caleb Walker to be. To some, he was a sweet little underdog story. To others, he was a punchline with a wrench. The local morning show ran a segment called "Can This Old Horse Run Again?" and the host smiled too brightly while pointing at a photo of the Mustang with its hood up and its front bumper hanging slightly low. At Reardon's Auto Service, customers pretended not to watch Caleb while watching him anyway. One man by the coffee machine said, 30 days. That thing needs 30 years. Another laughed and said, maybe Hale Motors should donate a shovel instead. Caleb heard them. He tightened the oil filter in his hand, wiped the rim clean, and said nothing. Not because the words did not hurt. They did. But pain was not a command. It did not get to decide what kind of man he became. After work, he drove home. With the scholarship flyer folded in his shirt pocket and a bag of discounted groceries on the passenger seat. Lily was waiting on the front steps with her backpack still on and her knees tucked under her chin. The moment he saw her face, he knew the day had followed her home. They called it the dead horse, she said before he could ask. Caleb set the grocery bag down beside her. Who did? Kids at lunch. They said you only got picked because people felt sorry for us. Her voice stayed small, but her chin trembled with the effort of holding it steady. Caleb sat beside her on the damp step. The evening air smelled like cut grass, rain, and distant barbecue smoke from someone's backyard. Across the street, a neighbor lowered his blinds too quickly, ashamed to be caught looking. Caleb did not wave. He did not scowl. He just sat close enough for Lily to lean into him if she wanted. Do you know what your mother used to say about people who laugh too early? He asked. Lily shook her head. She said they missed the ending. Lily looked up then, and for the first time that day, the corner of her mouth moved like it remembered hope. Inside the garage, the Mustang waited beneath the yellow bulb, its body dull and scarred, its tires soft, its chrome cloudy with age. Caleb changed out of his work shirt, rolled his sleeves, and began sorting parts across the bench. A cracked distributor cap. Old spark plugs. A fuel pump he had pulled from a salvage yard 6 months earlier. None of it looked like enough. Then Lily climbed onto her wooden stool and opened her sketchbook. Tonight, she had drawn the car in midnight blue again, but this time she added the city skyline behind it, all the windows glowing gold. What is that? Caleb asked. The day it drives downtown, she said. And everybody stops talking. Caleb froze with a socket wrench in his hand. There it was, a child's prophecy spoken without pride, without bitterness, just belief. Outside, a pair of teenagers rolled by slowly on bicycles, one of them filming the garage with his phone. There is the famous junk car, he called, not loudly enough to be brave, only loudly enough to be heard. Caleb looked up. Lily looked at him. The old rule of the world would have told him to answer sharp, to defend himself, to throw back embarrassment before it settled on his daughter's shoulders. But Caleb only stepped to the garage door and pulled it halfway down, not to hide, but to protect the work from becoming a show. "We do not answer cruelty with noise," he said, returning to the engine bay. "We answer it with work." The days began to stack themselves like worn tools. Day 5 was rust removal, the smell of grinding metal hanging in the air like bitter dust. Day 6 was wiring diagrams spread across the kitchen table while Lily circled colors with her crayons. Day 7 brought a surprise when Mrs. Alvarez from next door appeared with a covered dish and 2 sealed jars of iced tea. "I do not know cars," she said, placing them on the bench, "but I know tired people need dinner." Caleb thanked her, and she waved him off before he could say more. By day 8, Mr. Brooks from the corner brought an old floor jack. By day 9, a high school shop teacher left a box of spare sanding discs near the mailbox with a note that read, "For the girl who still believes." Slowly, quietly, the laughter outside the garage began to change shape. Not all of it. Not yet. The internet still had jokes. Grant Mercer still posted polished updates that made the campaign look generous and Caleb look grateful. But on Briar Lane, people started slowing down for different reasons. They brought coffee. They brought old parts. They brought stories about fathers, brothers, first cars, lost chances, and roads they wished they could drive again. Caleb never asked for applause. He barely asked for help. But grace has a way of entering through side doors when pride is not blocking the frame. On the 10th night, after Lily fell asleep in the passenger seat wrapped in Hannah's denim jacket, Caleb stood alone under the hood, listening to the soft ticking of cooling metal. The Mustang was still far from ready. The city still doubted him. Victoria Hale had not called once. But on the workbench, beside Hannah's faded note, Lily's newest drawing showed the car not as it was, and not even as it had been, but as something coming back to life. Caleb touched the paper gently with 2 fingers, then turned back to the engine. 30 days was not much time. But sometimes a miracle did not begin with thunder. Sometimes it began with a tired father in a small garage, choosing respect over anger, and one little girl refusing to stop seeing wings where the world saw rust. On the 11th day, Victoria Hale came to Briar Lane without cameras, without Grant Mercer, and without the kind of polished announcement that usually arrived before she entered a room. She parked a dark company sedan half a block away and walked the rest of the distance beneath a pale evening sky, her heels clicking softly against the sidewalk, her white coat replaced by a plain navy rain jacket. She had told herself it was oversight. She had told herself every responsible chief executive officer should personally inspect a public campaign carrying her company's name. But the truth was quieter than that. She could not stop thinking about Caleb Walker's voice in the rain, or the way he had placed his hand on that old hood as if it were not metal, but memory. When she reached the garage, she paused outside the half-open door. Inside, Caleb stood beside the Mustang with a flashlight in his teeth, guiding Lily's small hand toward the engine. "Not too close," he said gently. "Just listen first." Lily leaned forward, holding a length of rubber hose near one ear like a doctor with a homemade stethoscope. "It sounds uneven," she said. Caleb smiled. "Good. Where?" "Near the carburetor." "That is my girl." Victoria looked at them in silence. No reporters. No applause. No one performing gratitude for the company website. Just a father teaching his daughter patience in a garage that smelled of gasoline, old wood, and warm dust. Lily noticed her first. The child's smile faded, not into fear, but into guarded memory. Caleb turned slowly and removed the flashlight from his mouth. For a moment, the only sound was the soft ticking of the engine cooling under the hood. "Miss Hale," he said. "Mr. Walker," Victoria answered. "I did not mean to interrupt." Caleb wiped his hands on a towel. Most people who say that already have. The words were not sharp. That made them harder to answer. Victoria stepped just inside the garage, careful not to touch anything, though the place itself seemed to judge polished shoes. Her eyes moved over the workbench, the labeled jars of bolts, the faded photograph of Hannah tucked beside an old radio, and Lily's drawings taped along the wall like little windows into a future no one else had bothered to imagine. Grant said the restoration was behind schedule, Victoria said. Caleb gave a faint nod. Grant says a lot of things. Is it? Yes. Can you finish? Caleb looked at the Mustang, then at Lily, then back at Victoria. I have finished harder things with less. That answer landed somewhere Victoria did not expect. For years, people had spoken to her in numbers, projections, legal phrases, and rehearsed confidence. Caleb spoke like a man who had buried grief, paid rent late, packed lunches before dawn, and still remembered how to be kind. Lily climbed down from her stool, holding the rubber hose in both hands. Are you here to laugh again? She asked. Victoria's face changed. It was small, almost invisible, but Caleb saw it. So did Lily. The question had reached past the title, past the money, past the careful wall Victoria wore every day. No, Victoria said softly. I am not. Lily studied her for a moment, then walked to the bench and picked up her newest drawing. It showed the Mustang in midnight blue, parked in front of City Hall, with hundreds of tiny people standing around it. At the top, in uneven letters, she had written, Mom would have loved the sound. Victoria read the words twice. Your mother liked cars? She asked. Lily nodded. She said engines were like people. You have to listen before you decide what is wrong. The garage grew still. Victoria turned toward the photograph by the radio. Hannah Walker smiled from the picture with sun on her face and one hand resting on the Mustang's dashboard. Something about that image pulled Victoria backward through years she rarely visited. Before Hale Motors had glass towers and investors. Before her father's name was printed on buildings. Before every conversation in her life became strategy. She remembered being 9 years old in her father's first repair shop, sitting on an overturned bucket while he taught her the same lesson. Listen before you judge. Back then, he had grease under his nails and laughter in his chest. Later, success had changed the room around him. It had changed the people near him. Maybe it had changed her too. My father used to say something like that, Victoria said. Caleb watched her carefully. Used to. She looked down. Before the company became everything. Outside, the first streetlights flickered on, casting gold across the wet pavement. From a few houses away came the sound of a lawn mower shutting off, then the gentle quiet of evening settling over Briar Lane. Victoria stepped closer to the Mustang, not with ownership, not with judgment, but with something that looked almost like respect. She ran her fingers just above the fender without touching the chipped paint. Why keep this car? She asked. Caleb picked up Hannah's folded note from the bench and held it for a second before slipping it back into the tin box. Because my wife believed it still had a road left in it. Victoria nodded slowly, but her eyes had moved to the exposed back seat, where Caleb had begun removing the old upholstery. A narrow strip of tape stuck out beneath the cracked leather, yellowed with age and nearly hidden in shadow. Mr. Walker, she said, her voice different now. What is that? Caleb followed her gaze. He reached under the seat and carefully pulled at the tape. Something shifted inside the frame. A small plastic case slid free and dropped into his palm, dusty, scratched, and sealed with Hannah's handwriting on the label. For Caleb only, when the engine breathes again. Lily stepped closer. Victoria stopped breathing for half a second. Caleb stared at the cassette as if the past had just reached out from under the seat and touched his hand. The Mustang had been holding more than a promise. It had been holding a voice. Caleb did not play the cassette right away. For nearly a minute, he only stood there beneath the yellow garage bulb, holding the small plastic case in both hands as if it were made of glass instead of dust and time. Lily stood beside him, one hand gripping the edge of the workbench, her eyes fixed on her mother's handwriting. Victoria Hale remained near the fender, suddenly aware that she was standing inside a family moment she had not earned the right to witness. "I can leave," she said quietly. Caleb shook his head, but his voice took a moment to arrive. "No. You should hear it too." He crossed the garage and pulled an old cassette player from the shelf below the radio. It was gray, scratched, and missing one corner from years of being knocked around in toolboxes. Hannah had used it for grocery reminders, church choir practice, and little messages to Lily when she was too young to read. Caleb set it on the workbench, pressed the eject button, and watched the door open with a tired click. Lily stepped closer until her shoulder touched his arm. Caleb slid the tape in. For a second, nothing happened. Only static. Soft. Thin. Like rain falling in another room. Then Hannah Walker's voice filled the garage. "Caleb, if you found this, it means you finally got stubborn enough to take the back seat apart." Lily covered her mouth. Caleb closed his eyes. The voice was weaker than he remembered, but still hers, warm around the edges, with that small smile hiding inside every word. "I know you, and I know you probably waited too long because you were trying to fix everything else first. The sink. The bills. Everyone but yourself." A small breath came through the speaker. "I need you to listen carefully. This is not just about the Mustang." Victoria's posture changed. The softness in the room tightened into attention. Hannah continued, her voice low but steady. "When I worked temporary accounting for Hale Motors, I saw files I was not supposed to see. Old licensing agreements. Patent transfers. Names removed from documents. One name was Walker. Your father's name, Caleb." Caleb opened his eyes. The garage seemed to tilt around him. Lily whispered, "Grandpa." The tape crackled. "Your dad did not just restore cars. He designed a fuel efficiency conversion system years before anyone cared about clean transportation. He submitted it through a small inventor partnership. Hale Motors bought the rights later. But the paperwork was changed. His name disappeared. So did 3 others." Victoria took one step back as if the concrete had shifted beneath her. "No," she whispered, not in denial of Caleb, but in fear of what it meant. Hannah's voice went on. "I copied what I could. Not for revenge. I was never trying to ruin anyone. I just wanted the truth safe. Grant Mercer's signature is on the internal review. He knew. Someone higher may have known too, but I never found proof before I got sick." Caleb looked toward Victoria, and for the first time since they had met, she did not look powerful. She looked human. "Grant?" Caleb said. Victoria swallowed. "He has been with Hale Motors for 15 years. Then he knows more than he said." The cassette hissed again, and Hannah's voice softened. "Caleb, if Lily is listening, sweetheart, I am sorry I could not stay longer. But I need you to know something. Your dad comes from men who built things with honest hands. Do not let anyone convince you rust means worthless. Sometimes rust is just proof something stood in the weather and waited." Lily began to cry silently, not with panic, but with the ache of hearing love come back from a place no one can visit. Caleb wrapped one arm around her without taking his eyes off the cassette player. The machine clicked, then stopped. No one spoke. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful, almost painfully ordinary. A truck rolled past. A screen door closed. Somewhere a child laughed in a yard, unaware that inside one small garage, the past had just opened like a locked room. Victoria reached for the edge of the workbench, steadying herself. "Mr. Walker," she said, and this time there was no corporate polish in her voice, "I need to see those files." Caleb turned slowly. Why? Because if this is true, my company is standing on stolen credit. Your company mocked the man whose father helped build its future. The words were calm. That made them heavier. Victoria nodded once, accepting the weight instead of pushing it away. Then I need to know how much of that future was built wrong. Lily wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. Will they say Grandpa's name? Caleb looked at his daughter, then at the Mustang, then at the cassette player where Hannah's voice had gone quiet again. They will, he said. Not because we shout. Because the truth is going to run. Victoria looked toward the car's exposed interior. Where are the copies? Caleb remembered the label. For Caleb only, when the engine breathes again. His eyes moved to the old dashboard, then to the engine bay, then to the hollow behind the rear seat where the cassette had been hidden. Hannah had never done anything halfway. If she had hidden one thing, there would be more. He lifted the torn upholstery carefully, reached deeper into the seat frame, and felt metal beneath the padding. Not the frame. A box. Small. Flat. Sealed tight. When he pulled it free, Victoria covered her mouth with one hand. Inside were folded documents, a flash drive, and a photograph of Caleb's father standing beside the same Mustang in 1974, one hand on the hood, the other holding a blueprint marked Walker Adaptive Drive. Caleb stared at the picture until his grief became something steadier. Not anger. Not yet. Purpose. And in that quiet garage, with Lily beside him and Victoria Hale watching the foundation of her empire begin to tremble, the broken Mustang stopped being a charity project. It became evidence. By day 21, the work inside Caleb Walker's garage no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to a neighborhood that had slowly stopped laughing and started showing up. Mr. Brooks brought a portable work light and stayed until midnight holding it steady over the engine bay. Mrs. Alvarez packed sandwiches in foil and left them on the bench without asking for thanks. The high school shop teacher, Dennis Rowe, arrived with 4 seniors who knew just enough about cars to be useful and just enough about kindness to listen. Even Victoria Hale came after office hours in jeans, a faded sweatshirt, and shoes that could survive oil stains. She did not give orders. She held parts. She read old documents. She learned where the wrenches went. Caleb noticed, but he did not praise her for becoming decent. Grace was not a medal. It was a direction. By day 23, the documents from Hannah's metal box had been copied, scanned, and placed with a quiet attorney Victoria trusted more than her own board. The name Grant Mercer appeared on memos, approvals, and internal summaries tied to old patent transfers and public relations cleanups that had buried inventors beneath corporate language. Victoria read every page with a stillness that felt colder than anger. He told me those files were dead history, she said one evening, standing beside the Mustang with a folder in her hands. Caleb adjusted a fuel line and did not look up. Some people call history dead when they hope no one asks who killed the truth. Victoria absorbed that without defending herself. Lily sat in the passenger seat, polishing the old chrome radio knob with a soft cloth. Are you going to tell everyone? She asked. Victoria looked at the little girl, and the question seemed to find the part of her that had once sat on a shop floor beside her own father, before power taught her to speak carefully and feel privately. Yes, Victoria said. But we have to do it right. Caleb tightened the fitting, then stepped back. Right does not mean slow enough for him to hide. The garage went quiet. A moth tapped against the yellow bulb overhead. Outside, Briar Lane rested under a summer night, warm and still, the kind of night where every porch carried a small circle of light. On day 26, Grant Mercer changed the campaign. Without warning, Hale Motors released a new video online. It showed Caleb's Mustang from the worst possible angles, rust on the fender, cracked upholstery, oil on the concrete, Lily's taped drawings in the background cropped to look childish instead of hopeful. Grant's voice narrated with polished sympathy, calling the project a lesson in ambition, even when dreams exceed reality. By lunch, comments flooded in again. Some were kind. Many were not. At school, Lily heard one girl whisper, "Your dad is just a charity case." Lily did not cry until she got home. She walked straight into the garage, climbed into the back seat, and folded herself beneath Hannah's denim jacket. Caleb found her there 20 minutes later, her sketchbook unopened beside her. "Maybe we should stop," she whispered. Caleb sat on the edge of the driver's seat, careful not to crowd her. Because they are loud. Because they are everywhere. He looked through the windshield at the garage wall, where her drawings still hung, bright against old plywood. Then we will be steady everywhere they are loud. What if Mom was wrong about miracles? Caleb felt that question in his chest. He wanted to answer quickly, the way fathers do when they are afraid a child's hope might slip through their fingers. But truth deserved more respect than comfort dressed up too fast. "Maybe miracles are not things that arrive," he said. "Maybe they are things people build when quitting would be easier." Lily looked at him, eyes wet but listening. "Then I want to build it." That night, Victoria confronted Grant in the empty executive conference room at Hale Motors. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass like 1,000 silent witnesses. She placed the copied documents on the table. Grant glanced at them, then smiled the small practiced smile of a man who believed every problem had a price. "You have been busy," he said. "So have you." "Victoria, old paperwork can be misunderstood. So can kindness, Grant. But I am starting to understand both." His smile faded slightly. "You are risking the launch, the stock price, the board, everything your father built." Victoria looked at him steadily. "No. I am risking what you built on top of what men like Caleb's father were never credited for." Grant folded his hands. "Careful. The public likes poor fathers until they become inconvenient." Victoria stood. "Then let us see what they do with the truth." By day 29, the Mustang was nearly ready. Midnight blue primer covered the body, not perfect, but proud. The engine turned over cleanly. The old radio worked. The restored interior smelled of vinyl, cedar, and the faint sweetness of the air freshener Lily had chosen because Hannah used to like vanilla. Then, just after sunrise, Caleb opened the garage and stopped. The workbench had been emptied. The labeled folders were gone. The main ignition harness had been cut cleanly. A dark streak of oil spread beneath the car from a loosened line. Nothing was shattered. Nothing was dramatic. It was worse than that. It was deliberate enough to say, "You are not supposed to finish." Lily stood behind him in her pajamas, holding her breath. Victoria arrived 10 minutes later and froze at the doorway. Caleb did not shout. He did not curse. He walked to the Mustang, placed one hand on the roof, and bowed his head. For the first time in weeks, he looked tired enough to disappear. Lily reached for his hand. "Daddy?" He turned toward her, and whatever grief had entered his face moved aside for something stronger. "Get your sketchbook," he said softly. "Why?" "Because when people try to erase a promise, we draw it bigger." By noon, Briar Lane was full. Neighbors came with tools, extension cords, coffee, spare wire, and quiet determination. Dennis Rowe brought his students. Mr. Reardon closed the shop early and arrived with 2 mechanics. Victoria brought replacement components from Hale Motors and, for once, used her power without making a speech. They worked through the afternoon, through dinner, through the long blue edge of evening. No one laughed. No one filmed. No one called it charity. Under the garage light, Caleb rebuilt what had been taken, wire by wire, truth by truth, while Lily taped one final drawing to the wall, the Mustang rolling into City Hall Plaza with a single word written above it in careful letters, "Respect." By dawn on day 30, Briar Lane looked less like a quiet street and more like a small town waiting for church bells. The garage door stood open, the concrete floor was covered with empty coffee cups, wire clippings, folded towels, and the tired footprints of people who had chosen to believe when doubt would have been easier. Caleb Walker stood beside the Mustang with red eyes and steady hands, tightening the last battery terminal while the first light of morning slid across the midnight blue hood. The paint was not flawless. If a person looked closely, they could still see the faint scars beneath it, the places where rust had been sanded down but not forgotten. Caleb liked that. So did Lily. "It looks like it survived," she whispered, standing in Hannah's denim jacket with her sketchbook pressed to her chest. Caleb looked at the car, then at his daughter. It did. Victoria Hale stood near the workbench, holding the cassette player in one hand and the copied documents in a sealed folder under her arm. She had not slept either. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her sleeves were rolled, and there was a thin line of grease across her wrist that no one had bothered to point out. At 8 o'clock sharp, Caleb turned the key. The garage held its breath. The starter clicked once. Then again. For one terrible second, nothing followed. Lily's fingers curled around the edge of the door. Mr. Reardon closed his eyes. Victoria looked at Caleb, as if willing the whole world to be fair just once. Caleb rested his palm on the steering wheel and spoke so softly only Lily heard him. "Come on, Hannah." He turned the key again. This time, the engine caught. Low at first, rough around the edges, then stronger, deeper, fuller, until the sound rolled through the garage and out into the morning like something old remembering its name. No one cheered right away. They just stood there, stunned by the holiness of a promise kept. Then Lily laughed, and the whole garage came alive. At City Hall Plaza, Grant Mercer had already taken the stage. Cameras lined the sidewalks. Banners snapped in the warm breeze. Hale Motors' silver prototype sat beneath a white cover, and behind it, the company logo towered over the crowd like a polished crown. Grant smiled into the microphones with perfect concern. "We all hoped Mr. Walker's project would reach this moment," he said. "But dreams, unfortunately, must meet reality." A murmur passed through the crowd. Victoria was not on stage. That unsettled him, though he hid it well. "Today is not about failure," Grant continued. "It is about learning when to let go." Then the sound came. At first, people thought it was part of the program, some vintage audio effect rolling through the speakers. But it grew closer, turning heads one by one down the long avenue beside the plaza. A police officer near the barricade leaned forward. A reporter lowered her notes. Children climbed onto the base of a statue for a better view. The Mustang appeared at the far end of the street, moving slowly beneath the morning sun, midnight blue against the gray downtown pavement, its chrome catching light like small pieces of redemption. Caleb drove with both hands on the wheel. Lily sat beside him, sitting tall, her mother's jacket around her shoulders. Victoria followed in a company sedan, not leading, not claiming, only witnessing. The crowd parted without being asked. The old car rolled to a stop in front of the stage, and for the first time since the campaign began, Grant Mercer had nothing ready to say. Caleb stepped out. He did not smile. He did not wave. He opened Lily's door, helped her down, then placed the cassette player on the hood of the Mustang. Victoria walked up beside him and handed him the sealed folder. Grant's face tightened. "Victoria," he said into the microphone, trying to laugh, "this is not the schedule." She took the microphone from him gently, but firmly. "No, Grant. It is the truth." A hush spread over the plaza so quickly it felt like the city itself had inhaled. Caleb pressed play. Static filled the speakers, thin and trembling. Then Hannah Walker's voice rose over the crowd, soft, brave, and unmistakably real. She spoke of old files, removed names, patent transfers, and a system that had taken credit from honest hands. She said Walker Adaptive Drive. She said Grant Mercer. She said enough for every camera to turn from the car to the man on stage. Grant's polished smile vanished piece by piece. Victoria opened the folder and read the matching documents aloud, not dramatically, not cruelly, but with the clear calm of someone choosing character over comfort. When she finished, no one clapped. No one shouted. The mayor stood frozen. Reporters stopped typing. Executives stared at the ground. Caleb looked at Lily, and Lily looked at the Mustang, one hand resting on the warm fender. The entire city had gone silent, not because an old car had been restored, but because a poor man's dignity, a little girl's faith, and a woman's hidden truth had just driven straight through the heart of a lie. For a long moment after Victoria finished reading, the plaza remained so quiet that Caleb could hear the Mustang idling beside him, each low pulse of the engine steady as a heartbeat. Grant Mercer stood near the stage steps with his hands at his sides, his face pale beneath the television lights, no longer the man controlling the room, only a man surrounded by the truth he had trusted would stay buried. Victoria turned to him, not with triumph, not with cruelty, but with the solemn weight of responsibility. "Grant," she said, her voice carrying through every speaker in the square, effective immediately, "you are removed from all duties at Hale Motors pending a full independent investigation." No one gasped. No one needed to. The silence had already judged what arrogance could not defend. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it, because for once there was no polished sentence strong enough to bend reality back into his favor. Two company attorneys stepped forward and guided him away from the stage, not roughly, not dramatically, just firmly, the way consequences sometimes arrive when applause is over. Victoria faced the crowd again. Her eyes moved across the reporters, the board members, the city officials, the workers in blue Hale Motors shirts, and finally stopped on Caleb and Lily. "I stood on a stage 30 days ago and mocked what I did not understand," she said. "I mistook age for failure. I mistook rust for worthlessness. And worst of all, I mistook a good man's silence for weakness." Caleb looked down, uncomfortable beneath so many eyes, but Lily reached for his hand and held it tightly. Victoria continued, "Today, Hale Motors will begin the process of restoring public credit to Walter Walker and the other independent inventors whose work helped shape our technology. Their names will no longer be footnotes in locked files. They will be part of our history, where they always belonged." A soft sound moved through the crowd then, not quite applause yet, more like 100 people exhaling at the same time. Victoria stepped down from the stage and walked toward Caleb. The cameras followed, but she did not look at them. When she reached him, she stopped in front of Lily first. "Your mother was very brave," she said. Lily's eyes shone. She sounded scared. Victoria nodded. "Bravery usually does." Then Victoria turned to Caleb, and the powerful chief executive officer who had once dismissed him in front of the city lowered her head. "Mr. Walker, I am sorry. Not as a brand. Not as a company. As a person." Caleb studied her face. He saw no performance there, only the tired honesty of someone finally meeting the cost of her blindness. He could have made her smaller. The crowd might have let him. A lesser pain would have demanded it. But Caleb had not carried Hannah's promise through 30 days of humiliation to become another voice of public shame. He took a slow breath, then offered her the same grace he had been teaching Lily all along. "Then make it right," he said. Victoria nodded. "I will." In the weeks that followed, the story did not fade the way most stories do. Hale Motors opened its archives to independent investigators. Walter Walker's name was added to the company's innovation hall, not in a corner, not in small print, but on the main wall beneath a restored photograph of him standing beside the Mustang in 1974. The old campaign slogan was removed from every page, every banner, every press release. In its place came something quieter and better, the Hannah Walker Foundation, a scholarship program for children from working families who wanted to learn automotive repair, engineering, and design. The first workshop was held in Caleb's neighborhood, in a renovated building only 12 blocks from Briar Lane. Lily cut the ribbon with both hands, wearing Hannah's denim jacket and a smile too bright to hide. Caleb stood behind her, still in work boots, still uncomfortable with attention, still the same man who checked tire pressure before long drives and packed lunches before sunrise. Victoria attended without a speech. She brought a framed copy of the original Walker Adaptive Drive blueprint and handed it to Caleb privately. "This belongs with your family," she said. Caleb looked at the blueprint, then through the workshop window where Lily was showing two younger kids how to hold a wrench properly. "No," he said softly. "It belongs where kids can see what honest hands can build." So they hung it in the front hall, not as a trophy, but as a lesson. Months later, on a clear Saturday morning, Caleb and Lily drove the Mustang through downtown. The paint caught the sun in deep midnight blue waves. The engine ran smooth, not perfect, but alive. At a red light near City Hall Plaza, people on the sidewalk turned to look. Some recognized him. Some recognized the car. A little boy pointed. An older man lifted his cap. No one laughed. Lily rested her hand on the dashboard, right where Hannah used to. "Mom heard it, Daddy," she whispered. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, but his smile trembled. "Yes," he said. "I think she did." The light changed, and the Mustang rolled forward, past the glass towers, past the place of old humiliation, past the city that had once mistaken quiet for weakness. Caleb did not need the world to cheer for him. He never had. Because dignity does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives in an old car, rebuilt by tired hands, carrying a father, a daughter, a promise, and the kind of truth that teaches an entire city how to be silent with respect.